In this video, I'm gonna cover Power Query that's available in Excel. We're not gonna cover basic things in Power Query you use. I did do a lot of videos that shows how you can use this tool in different situations, but it's mostly gonna be about understanding and writing the actual M language. Generally, when we work with Power Query, we will go under Data, and we may have like a table, existing table in Excel, and we'll do from table range to basically take that table and make a connection and then do some transformation with that data. In this, I'm not gonna have a table. I'm not gonna have anything for that matter. We're gonna write the whole thing from scratch so that we understand what is actually happening behind the scenes when you use all of these different buttons and what code it actually generates for you. Once you get to a point that you do things that you do using these basic buttons, if you want to extend your knowledge and be able to do more, then you need to be able to get in there and start modifying the actual code. And this is where you need to actually understand what that code does to be able to modify it. So for that reason, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start by going under this get data, and I'll go from other sources. And for this, I'm gonna do a blank query. And that means it's not gonna create anything for us. We're just gonna start from scratch. And it's gonna open our regular window right here. You can see the steps here. All we have is what says source. And usually when you start doing different things, you may have noticed that it creates more steps here on the sidebar. So for me to be able to modify the code, I'm going to click on this Advanced Editor button, and that's going to open the actual code that was generated for us. And currently, there's literally nothing going on here. So what we have here is this variable called source, and then we have the output source. So this is a variable that can be named literally pretty much anything you want. So I could go here and call this X, and then as the output, I could use that same X. And this would have worked the same way. And essentially what's happening here, we're doing some steps here in this let section, which is this top section here. And then we output something in this in section. So if you look in this let section, the only step we have here, we have this variable X, and we make it equal to this empty text, double quotations, and then we'll return that X variable here in this in. So basically the output of this query should be a blank, basically an empty string. So with this, if I do done, we'll see that all we get is basically nothing. It's an empty string. Now you can see that my step that was called source, now it's just called X because that's my variable name here. Now I'm going to go back to that advanced editor, click on this. Now let's say we want to change this to the word hello. So I can just type the word within those quotations, and then we can return that X variable as an output. So if I do done, you'll see now we output that text hello, just like that on the screen. I'm going to go back to advanced editor again. It's under home section, so you want to remember that. So if I wanted my output to be a number rather than text, then it would not have any quotations. So for example, if I do 55 and then I output that X here, then it should output 55. As you can see, we got our number here as an end result. I'm going to go back to home again, click advanced editor. So far we talked about text and numbers. So text goes in quotations, numbers, no quotations. You also have Boolean values like true and false, and that would be lowercase true and lowercase false. So if I do this and press done, you'll see that it outputs true. See, like uppercase true, that's what we get as an end result. But in our actual language in the editor, we type the true lowercase here. So that's true. You could also do false. It would be outputting false. Now earlier I had this case when I had this double quotations here, and double quotes means empty text, but it doesn't mean blank. So if your intention is to actually return blank, then what you do, you return null. Again, lowercase, so null would be a blank. So if I do this, press done, it will actually say null here, but if you then at some point load this to Excel spreadsheet, it would be a blank instead of saying null. Go back to Advanced Editor again. So finally, let's try to put some dates. So if I was trying to enter a date, the way I would have done that, I would do this pound key and then do this set of parentheses and then date like this. And then you enter year, month, day. So for example, 2022, comma 12, comma 4. This would be, well, let's actually do comma correctly. This would be December 4th, 2022. So if I hit done, see, that's our date, December 4th, 2022. So those are our common basic data types. Here you have to know how to do a date, how to do a number, how to do a blank, how to do text. Now, when you define variables here, like X, you can then use those variables in other things other than just outputting them. So for example, I can have a variable X here and define it as a 4 here to begin with. And then I can add another step. So right now, see, we have this single step here. So the way you add a step, you do a comma, and after comma, now we have the next step. So here I can, for example, declare another variable like y and make it 5. So now I got two variables, x and y. And then I can do comma and then go another line and do some sort of operation using those variables. So I'm going to create another variable called z, where I'm going to add that x and y together. And at this point, if I just leave this in to be x, that should still output 4 because our x is 4, right? So if I do done, see, it outputs 4. However, if I go back to that home advanced editor and we output that z variable that we created in this step, then it should add this x and y together. So that should be 9. And that's what we got here. See, 9. And now if you look here on the right, we have those steps. So each comma separation you have is another step there. So x, y, and z steps, those are literally these variable names here. Now, when you declare these names, they can either be just a single word like this, basically no spaces, no special characters. As a variable name, they don't have to be a single character. They can be like total here, and then we can output that total, and this should work just fine. Then this step is going to be called now total. But most of the time when you use the actual editor itself, it will probably create your variables in a little different way because it has spaces usually in these names. So what it does this pound key, and then the name of the variable goes in quotes, like total amount. Like if I wanted to do this, then if I want to output this, then I output this like total amount, like so. So that should work too. So that's another way to declare like a variable or a step, whatever you want to call this. And if I do done, then it should be see total amount here, and it should output that 9 over here. So it works the same way. So when you usually write your own code, you're likely to not use like this syntax, but you're going to see this when it automatically generates your code and you want to be familiar what this actually is. Now at this point, let's simplify this. I'm going to remove some of these steps. And by the way, it's probably worth to mention, you want to remember to add these commas, right? Because if you forget to have one of those commas, then you have syntax error. So you're going to get error messages. So for now, I'm just going to do an X and return that X. So far, we know basic types like numbers, text, dates, things like that. Now let's create now a list. A list is basically a list of comma-separated things. And the way you create a list, that would be this set of curly brackets like this. And then you comma-separate your list of items. So for example, if I do 7, 99, 2, 111, this would be a list of 4 items that we hold within this variable called x, and then we output that x. Now let me show you what happens when I hit done. So you can see we get this column top that says list that basically explains you in this editor that we're working with a list here. And then it outputs this different items in that list, just like this. And then all the way on the right here, we have the name for this whole query that we created, and it's called query 1. Now, if I just go ahead and call this learn, that would be the name of this query. So if you have a list, for example, you could directly load it to your spreadsheet if you wanted to. Right now, all of this is in the memory for this Power Query tool, but if we wanted to load this in Excel, we can actually do that. So I can go under Home here, do Close and Load to, and here I can load it to an Excel table. So I can click here, and it's gonna ask us, where would you like that table to be placed? Now you can place it on a new tab, or you can click existing worksheet and basically point to the cell where you want to load that. Now by default, it's A1, the first cell. It's good enough for me. So if I press OK now, you'll see that it's gonna load that list here in Excel. And what it does, it takes for lists, it takes the name of the query, which was called learn, and it puts it as the column name. And then the rest of the data kind of follows here. Now I'm going to go ahead and right click on this learn and click edit. It's going to go back to our editor. Now I'm going to go back to home and click advanced editor so I can get back to this. Now in a list, you can store all those different types of values that I've mentioned before. So right now I have numbers, but any one of these could be like trues and falses or text, or any of those other types like date or something like that, right? So if I just do this, press done, you'll see it simply just has hello there here as this item because it's a list, and this item in a list is hello there. Now, when you have a list, you can access different items in different positions in that list. So if I go back to that advanced editor, I'm gonna add another step here, and I'm gonna create a Y variable. And if I wanted to get this first item in a list, the list is called X, and what we do, we open this set of curly brackets again, and we start with a position. So if I do 0, that would be the first position in this list. So that would be the 7 because that's in position number 1. So if I now output that Y right here and press done, you'll see that we get a 7 because the first item in that list was a 7. Now, if I go back to that editor and modify this position to be 2, that would be 0, 1, 2. That would say hello there, right? So if I hit done, you'll see it says hello there instead of just being one of those numbers. So we can access different positions in that list by basically pointing to the index right here. Now, lists can also have a list inside of a list. So to give you an example of that, I'm going to go to any one of these positions, like this one. And in that position, I'm going to do another set of curly brackets. And now I have a list within a list. Now, if I just go ahead and add a couple of items in this list, so I'll just do 9 and 11. So now if you want to access these different things, well, I guess before we access them, let's actually just output the X right now so you can see what it looks like in the editor. Now, X now refers to this list right here. Even though I have this Y, I'm not really outputting that, so it doesn't matter. So if I press done, you'll see that I got the 7 in the list, which was just a number. Now, the second item is a list, so it shows as a list in that particular position, number 2. And then we got this and this, right? Now within this editor, I could technically click on this list. What it's going to do, it's going to automatically add another step here for me if I do that. But I'm not going to do that right now. I'll just go back to home and click advanced editor to get back to this. And let's now try to navigate through this. So if I wanted to get to this over here, that's the second item within this main list I got here, right? So the main list is called X. If I want to get to the second item, that would be item number 1, starting from position 0. So at this point, this should refer to this list right here, which means if I just output that Y, the output should just say list. So if I do that, see, it's a list that has 9 and 11 in it. If I wanted to output a particular item from that list, we can go back to our editor. And here, since this is a list, we can then, within that list, do another set of brackets and say which item from that internal list we want to access. So if I do 0, which is the first item, that would refer to this 9 within that second list. So if I hit done, you'll see we're going to output 9 here. Just like that. And with that same logic, if I go back to Advanced Editor and modify this to 1, which would be the second item within this list, that should say 11, right? So if I hit done, see 11 is exactly what I've got. So now that we know about lists, let's next cover something that's called a record. So record is something that can store key value pairs. So if you're coming from a different programming background, maybe you're familiar with like dictionaries, or maybe if you're coming from JavaScript, you're familiar with objects, something similar to that. So to do so, if I go here, you basically add a set of square brackets like this. So that's our notation for something that's called a record. And then you do the key, color, and do equals, and then do the value for this. So the value is going to be depending if it's text or a number. You know, text goes in quotes, numbers not in quotes, similar to everything I've already covered before. So in this case, this is going to be a record in which there is this key called color, and for that color, there's this red value. So usually, most of the time when you have a record, you will have more than one key within the record, even though you don't have to. Right now, I just have this color key. And if we just return that Y right now, hit done, this should be that C record where we have this key color and the value for that is red. Now let's go back under Home, under Advanced Editor, and let's actually add another key within this same record. So let's say color is red and the amount equals some number, 45. So basically I'm coming up with these keys myself, right? Color, we do amount. Now we have two keys with two different values. So if I had done, that should show this record. See, this is the way kind of record shows up on this editor. And if I do another one, it's just going to do another line like this and say like this is this, right? Let's do one more so you can see it. So I'm going to go back here, do another comma and say is complete equal true. So let's do a Boolean value in this too. So if I do done, see, it's going to do this. So if I go back to that Advanced Editor, now let's say we need to access some of these things in a different step. So I'm going to add another step, do a comma, and go here, and we'll do a Z. And if I wanted to now get to the color of this Y record, then I would do Y. And then in square brackets, I'm going to do color. So then let's output Z. And if I do done, see, the output I get is the value, which is red. So the color of that is red. I'm going to go to Advanced Editor. So let's just rename this instead of Y. Let's just call this product. And then we'll use that same variable name here. So we'll do product color is red and amount is 45. So this way, if I enter amount here instead of color, that should get us this 45. If I do done, 45 right there. Go back to our Advanced Editor. So essentially, when you work with what's called a record, with records, you have keys to access different things within the record instead of positions when you have a list, when you say like 0, 1, 2, 3. Now, you could store a list within a record, or you can store a record within a list. So to give you an example, if I go here, I can do a comma and say sizes or something like that equals, and then I can do a list here of some sort and say 9, 10, 11. So now we have this list right here within the sizes over here, which means if I just go here and do sizes like this within that product, here, that should give us this list over here. So if I hit done, you'll see we got that list 9, 10, 11. And since it's a list, if I go to advanced editor, now within that list, we can refer to things based on a position. So if I do 0, that would be this first number, 9. So if I hit done, you'll see that outputs 9, and the same logic works here with any list. So that was an example of storing a list within a record. Now, like I said, we can also store a record within a list. An example here, let's go to this list, and as this last item, let's store a record. So if you remember, a record would be this square brackets. And here, I can basically store some key value pairs again. So now we have this X variable that holds this list over here. So within that list, in this position, we have a record. So if I wanted to access that, I'm going to get rid of this and do it over here. So that would be coming from this X. So I would do X. And since that X is a list, we're going to do a set of curly brackets, and we're going to refer to this position in that list, which would be 0, 1, 2, 3. So 3 would be the position. So if I just do X3, that should refer to this record. So just to test this, let's just output that Z that we got here and see what it looks like. There it is. We got name Anna, position manager. But if you're trying to get to a specific value, you can of course do that by again adding a set of square brackets here and then say you want to get name for this record. So with that, it should output Anna. And as you can see, it does. So next, let's actually create a table and output a table so you can see what it looks like. So for that, let me actually get rid of a lot of this. And let's just name this. Now, I wanted to call it a table, but because of this highlighting, that means it's a reserved keyword. So you want to avoid to use variables that get highlighted because that means it's a reserved keyword. So I'll just call it TBL1. I could have probably called it just table1. That should be okay. And then we'll output that table here. Now, we're going to have to make that table. So to create a table, there are a lot of built-in ways to create tables. But if we want to manually make a table, then you can do this pound key and then write the keyword table, open parentheses. And then for something to be a table, you need the headers of the table and you need the data in that table. Now, both of those would be a list within this. So the first thing we do a first list here, and list would be this curly brackets. And then in this list, we give all different column names, comma separated. So if my first column would be name and the second column would be something like age, then this is the way it would look like. If I have another column, I would just comma separate all those columns. Now this will be my list of column names. Then we go after this list and do another comma, and we do another list. Now this list is going to be a list that has lists in it. The way it works, basically, you want to think about this as different rows within your table. So if I have a row, one row within that table, it would just have one more list within this. And within this list, now you would have what's in your first column and what's in your second column. So for example, if I want a person Anna here, and I want her age here to be 27 or something like that, that would be now a single row within that table. Now, if you want more rows, then what you do a comma and do another list here. And each new list within this second list is another row in your table. So here I'm going to do, let's say, Amanda, and we'll do some number for Amanda here, and so on, right? You basically just keep adding more rows to what you call your table. So let's just take a look and see what this looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and hit done. And now we've generated a table. See the column names, name and age. And you can see we got these 2 rows of data, and all of those are separated into their own columns. So if I go back to that advanced editor and go back within the second list, add a comma and add another third list within that second list, then we can generate another row within our table. So I'm going to do Peter. And if I do done, then we're going to get that extra line within our table. So that's how we can make a table within this editor. Another thing that's interesting is that you can actually concatenate 2 tables together. And by concatenate, it's basically just merging different tables together. So let me just add another table below this. So I'm going to do a comma, and I'm going to define another table. I call it TBL2. And I'll just simplify this by copy pasting some of this. No comma after the last line. I am going to add more lines here, but for now, this is good enough. So let's define another table. Now notice that in this table, I also have name and age columns like this. I'm just going to change some of this data. So at this point, I got 2 tables. The first table has 3 rows. The second table has 2 rows. So what I could do, I could basically combine those 2 tables together by creating another variable. And then I can take that TBL1 and use this concatenate operator, the and sign, to join the second table to it. And then let's output that third table, TBL3, down here. And at this point, if I do done, notice that we got 1 table with both of those tables combined. Within these 2 tables I was working on, they both had the same column names. So if I go back to that advanced editor, the first table had name and age, and the second table has name and age. Now, what if we go within the second table and add an extra column? So I'm going to go right in the middle of the first 2 columns, and I'm going to add another column within the second table. And then since we have this third column, now each row in our data must have that data in there, right? So I'm going to go for Olivia here and type some data. And then for Jane, let's say we want to leave that blank. So I'll do null, remember, for blanks. So at this point, let's try to concatenate these 2 tables together and see what happens. So if I do done, so you can see it did recognize, even though our columns were not in the same order, by column names, it knew to combine names together, ages together in the same place. And for position, it basically just fills whatever was not available in the first table with a null, meaning a blank. And then I also made a blank myself for this one. So what I'm trying to show is that even though our tables may not have exactly the same column names, we can still combine them like this using that concatenate operator, which is that and sign right here. Now, once you start to understand the different data types you're dealing with lists, you're dealing with records, you're dealing with tables. Each data type has a lot of internally available functions you could use to do things with those different pieces of data you have. To give you an example, these 2 things are tables right now, the first one and the second one. So if we just erase this and type table, uppercase, see, as I start typing, our autocomplete gives us all different available functions we can basically use on tables. So for example, if I just scroll all the way up, see the first one I can see is add column. So this is going to allow us to add another column to one of our existing tables. So if I do this table add column, open parentheses, then it's going to tell us what it needs from us. So you can see it's a function and it's going to ask you for different things. And then it's also going to tell you what it returns in the end. So you can see over here, it says table, which means after we do all of this, it's going to return another table as a result. Here within parentheses, it's going to ask us what it needs in this function. And the first thing it needs is a table. So I can give it either the first table or the second table to work with. So for example, if I just use the first table, TBL1, that would be this table up here, comma. Now then we have the new column name, what we want to name this new column that I'm generating. So I'm going to call it extra data. It's just a column name and it goes, see, as text. And if you remember, text is in quotations. And then you see there's this column generator as function. So for this, we're going to need a function. Now we've never made any functions yet. So we're going to make one in just a second. But for now, let's just do a comma here. And for now, let's just do an empty function. And we'll talk about those in just a second. But the syntax here is going to be this. I'm going to do open and close parentheses. We're going to do this what's called an arrow function with this syntax equals and greater than. And then you follow it by what this function actually does. So for now, I'm just going to say that function just returns null. I'm going to explain you all of this in just a second in a little better way so you understand what exactly is going on here. But for now, this would be the function as our third parameter, and that should generate this new extra data column using this function that I've made here. So this function that basically generates the new column, it has to accept each row here in this parentheses list. So for now, I'm just going to type row like this, and then we're going to return a null. Again, I'll go over this function and explain you what functions do and how they work. For now, let's just leave it at this. And if I hit done, see we have this extra data column that has all nulls in it. So basically we made a new column for this table. And within that table, we basically made that column using this function. And you apply this function for every row in this table to create this data. Let's quickly do another table method here before we get to functions. So here, for example, you can see there is like table row count, there is table column count. So if I do this table column count, open parentheses, then you'll see it's going to ask us, give me a table. So if I go ahead and give that table 1 here, this is not asking for any other arguments, so this is all we need. So if I return this variable tbl3, right now hit done, we get 2. And the reason we get 2 is because basically it gives us the column count for this table right here. And this table over here, this table 1, has 2 columns. So that same way there was that row count function, if you remember, see row count. And again, that's going to ask us, if I open this, a table. So if I give it our first table, it should tell us how many rows we have in this table. And in this table, we have 3 rows here. So the output should be 3. So again, what I'm trying to show you here is that depending on the data type you have, you will have a lot of this available built-in functions you can use on that data type to do different things. If you're dealing with a list data type, then you would do list dot, and it would tell you what are different things you could do with a list instead of a table. Now, since these two things are tables, then I do table dot to get what things I could do on a table. Now, with this in mind, let's get back to functions so we can understand what I was doing a little bit ago. And to create a function, well, let's just keep these lines on top, even though I'm not going to use them. Let's just name this function in some way. So let's just call add as our function name. So again, that's just a step. And what I'm going to do this set of parentheses here, and then this arrow right here. So this is what we call an arrow function. After this arrow, you say what that function actually does. So for example, if I just type 56 right here, and then in my next step, I'm going to call that function. So I'm going to type total equals, and I'll do add, which is this function name. And because this is a function, we call that function by using parentheses like this. And then I'm going to try to output that total down here, which is this variable in this step. So let's just go ahead and hit done and see what happens. And you can see I got 56 out of this. So if I go back to advanced editor, so basically what happened here, I defined a new function here called add, and I make it equal to this function syntax. And if you're familiar with something like arrow functions in JavaScript or other languages, you should feel right at home at this point. But this will be our function syntax opening. This is the actual function here, the arrow function. And this is what this function returns. So this function returns 56. Now, to call that function, we need to do this open close parentheses for this add function. Now, once we call this function, we get the output 56, which is what this total becomes, and then we'll return that 56. Now, usually when you do functions, you don't just return a hard-coded number, even though technically you could, as you can see, but most of the time you don't. So what do you usually do? You probably pass some parameters to this function, and we can do that by defining those parameters within this parentheses. So I can create, for example, an internal parameter x within this function, and then here I can say, let's do x plus 1 as a return for this function. So later, when I want to call this function, I can pass that argument here in parentheses. So if I pass 23 here, then that 23 is going to be this x. And then we can do 23 plus 1. That should basically return 24. And that's what our total would be. So if I hit done, see, our output is 24 based on our input 23 to that function. Now, that function could accept multiple arguments instead of one argument. Instead of just one x, I can also pass like y here. And then I could add x and y together like this within this function. And then here we could basically just pass those parameters. I could do 12 here and 16 as a second y. So at this point, 12 plus 16 should basically be 28. So if I do done, that should give us that 28. So basically now I have a function that does something here. And based on what it does, it's going to return some value in the end. In this case, essentially what I'm doing, I'm just adding two numbers together. That's all I did. And this is what our function syntax is. So this is a function, and within parentheses, you give that function one or more arguments, and then you say, what should that function do right here? So now let's get back to that adding a column to a table. I'm just going to go up here and create, well, maybe down here. Let's actually do that after this. And I'm going to create table 3. Here, we're going to do that table, add column, open parentheses. And if you remember, it's going to ask us for a table. So I'm going to do TBL1, the first table, comma, then the column name for this new column. So I'm going to just type new age, comma. And if you remember the last argument, it's called a function. And basically what it needs here is a function that's going to generate that information in this new column. And the way this works, it's going to provide each row data to that function as a parameter, and then you could use that information within that function. So, for example, if I create a function here, like this, now within this parentheses, we're going to pass the actual information for the row. This is a variable name. You can call it anything you want. So if I just call it R, that would refer to a row from our table. So imagine if this is my table, the first row in this table is this, which is basically this Anna 27. That's what we got in our first row. Now here, what I can do, I can take that row, and within that row, I can access the age column, and then I can say, let's add 1 to that. So right now, if I just return this table 3, press done, you can see that this new age column is 1 up from our previous age column. So basically, what essentially happened here, I gave it this row here in each line, and within each line, basically you have this key value pairs. And that key value pairs works with the column names you got in your table, which is the name and age. In this case, to access what's in that age column, I had to do the age down here. And then I take that information in that row and add 1 to it. And then we keep applying this same function for every row in that table. And as a final result, we generate a new column, which is age plus 1. 1 up from that. So if I do age plus 5 here, then at this point, it should take each one of those lines where we have the age and add 5 to everything to generate this new column. And there it is, see, up 5 from the previous one. And that's how this function syntax is going to work here. Now, there are alternative ways to write this, and that would be, for example, instead of this R, I can do an underscore, and then here, I just don't type that R at all, and basically just do this square brackets syntax and refer to that age column in the table. So if I do this and hit done, that should return exactly the same thing. So that's just the same thing written in a different way. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever. You may also see this whole thing here replaced with the word each, like this. And if I done, I'm going to get exactly the same results. So again, these are different syntaxes to get a function here. So we basically have this internal function that's going to work on each line like this. So this says each, and then we have the column name we refer to, and then we say, let's add 5. If I add 2 to it, obviously it's going to do that. So you're likely to see different syntaxes here. Just know these are just all the same thing in different ways. We should be able to also pass one of our existing functions here as a function. So for example, I can create this add function that I've made here. Let me get rid of this line. So in this function called add, I'm going to accept a parameter called R, and then I'm going to say, take the age from R and add 7 to it. So this is now the function that I've created here called add. And then I should be able to just go here and pass that function called add in this position. So let's go ahead and hit done. And you can see I got the same result. So now I was able to create a named function called add. And that named function, what it does, it takes each age and adds 7 to it. And then we just pass that function here. So all of these are valid named functions. You can just make the function directly here, which is what you're going to see most of the time. But sometimes when you have something more complicated, it may be more beneficial to basically create a function separately and then just pass it here as a function. Now, this brings me to if statements. Sometimes when you do different steps, you may want to do some conditionals. Like in this case, we have this table with different people and their age. So to do an example, let's just generate a new column here, but instead of that new column being just numbers, let's say we're just going to say above 30 or below 30, something like that. So what I can do, I can just go here as this function, and instead of just adding 7 right here, I can say if that age equals, actually it's not going to be equals, I'm just going to say if it's greater than, but I want to mention that if you do equals, it's just going to be one equal sign. If you're coming from other programming languages, you may be used to doing 2 or 3 equal signs. Here, it's just going to be a single equal sign. But here, I'm just going to say if it's greater than 30, then what do I want to return? So I want to return some text. So I'm just going to say above 30. Else, what do we want to happen? So I'm going to say not above 30. So this is how our if statements basically work. So you're basically saying if this condition is true, then do this. Otherwise, do this. Because this is a function, this function called add that we're passing here, so we should now generate a new column in our table that's going to say above 30 or not above 30. So let's just go ahead and run this so we can see what this looks like. See, not above 30 because this number is not above 30, and this is above 30 because, well, it is above 30, right? So that's our if statements. You can also use them. and this is the syntax. So it's all lowercase, and this is all case sensitive, by the way. So you do if, then else. And then this is the condition. That's going to be true and false logical test. You should be able to nest your if statements as well. So for example, we can do something like, if it's above 30, then say above 30 right here. And then in our else statement, instead of just outputting a single value, I can do another if statement. And I can say, if that age here is greater than 25, then above 25, and then else, I'm going to say 25 or below. So at this point, I just did an if statement nested within another if statement. So if I hit done, you see how we got above 30 here, above 25 here, and 25 or below here. So basically, like any other if statement, this works until the first true if statement. So basically, if this is true, it's above 30, then we do this and we're done. We don't check the rest of these, right? So we check if the age is above 30, then put above 30. Now then, if not, then we do this else statement right here, which is a whole different if statement. So again, it checks if it's above 25. So if we get to this second if statement, we already know that person was not above 30. So now we can check if that person is above 25 and basically react to it that way. And that's our if statement and our nested if statement, you could say. And as you can see, it works like you would expect. Now, most of the time, you don't usually make these tables manually like this here, but you would usually just get them from your existing tables in your spreadsheet. So let's just do a quick example of that so you can now see how all of this can be used in context using Excel tables and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel this. And as a matter of fact, I'm just going to delete all of the stuff I did here with all of the steps. We should probably also just clear this. And I just have empty string, and I return that empty string. That's pretty much all I got. So let's just go back to Excel, and there's nothing here, so therefore it returns that empty cell. Let's just generate a table. So I'm going to go in here someplace, and we're going to create a table. So for this to be an actual table that we can access in our Power Query, we need to convert it to a table. So I'm going to select this, go to Insert, click on Table. This says headers. See this first row? I'm going to press OK. So now we have a table, and this table is going to have a name. So if I go to this table design, see it's called Table 2. Let me rename this to something easier to remember. So I'm going to call this People. So now this is a table called People. Let's try to access this in Power Query. Now, an easy way for that would be to just go under Data, click on this, and click From Table Range, and that would just do the whole thing for you, which is what you should probably do. But right now, we're trying to learn the language. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to right-click here and edit again. And by the way, if you lose this or you close this, you can always get it back by clicking on this Data, Query, and Connections. And that should give you these queries from your Power Query you can access to. And right-click and edit will get us back to this editor. So I'm going to go to Advanced Editor. And now let's try to access that table that we got in our spreadsheet. So for that, I'm going to do Excel. And you can see we have this option for current workbook, which is the file that we're currently in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Open, close parentheses like this because it's a function. And we're going to store that here in this TBL1. So let's just return that so we can see what does this actually look like. So if I hit done, so as you can see, the result is basically a table. And in this table, we have two columns. One of them is called content. The second one is name. Now we want to narrow down to this line where we have this people. only. So I want to filter this table by this column name, and I want to filter to this value people. So I'm going to do so by going to this advanced editor, and I'm going to add another step here. I'm going to call this step people. And what we'll do, we'll take that TBL table variable, we'll do this set of curly brackets, and this allows us to filter our tables by doing this syntax. So within those curly brackets, we do this square brackets, we pass the name of the column we want to filter by and the value we want to filter it to. So actually this was called people, probably not person. So the column was called name. So if I just scroll down here, see the column up here is called name. So that's what I'm going to use to filter this. And I'm going to make it equal people, which is this value. So let's actually return that people variable that we've defined here. Let's see what this looks like. So if I hit done, you'll see it basically returns this. It returns at this point, if you look at this, this is basically like a record. And within this record, we have this content table and name people. Now I want to get to the content to this table, which is a table object itself. So that would be this content key within this, what it gives us a record as a result of that filter with it. So I'm going to go back to that advanced editor. And if you remember, the way you get to a key within a record, you do this square bracket syntax, and then you pass the key. In this case, the key is content. So I'm going to do content like this. And we still have all this in people. So we're going to return people. So let's hit done. And you can see what I got as a result of this is the actual table I had in my spreadsheet. So I was able to connect to my spreadsheet. Then from my spreadsheet, I was able to filter to the table object that I wanted to get to. And then I got to that table basically by using the key content on that record. So at this point, now we have a table and we have like name, we have age, we have all this information. So I could use anything I did before with tables here. So for example, I could go back to advanced editor. Let's say to this table called people, we want to add a column. So I'm going to do comma, and we're going to do new table variable, and I'm going to take table.add column, and I'm going to basically pass that table called people, comma, I'm going to name the new column. I'm going to call it new age, comma, and then the function I want to use to generate that new column. And I'm going to do that by, again, using one of our function syntaxes. So we could just do the shortest version, which is just each. And then we could take that age column. Shouldn't be any quotes around it. And basically just add one to it. Or any of those other things I did before should work here. So at this point, I want to actually return that new table, which is what I defined here. Always remember that if you forget one of these commas like this, see, I get this error. I do need the comma for each step. And then as a result, if I done, see, we now have a new column here. And you can see here we have our steps. The step 1, step 2, step 3, which are the same steps we got basically here. Step 1, step 2, and step 3. And then once we're done with whatever it is we want to do, then we can just return this back to our spreadsheet as a new table to load it in there. So I can go close and load, close and load. Now you can see that I got this error. It says it would move cells in a spreadsheet. So basically some things are getting on a way here, and that's the reason I'm not able to do this right now. So let's actually load it someplace else. So I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to do load to. Now see, it's loading it to a table right now. So what I'm going to do for right now, let's do only create connection. Let's do OK. And now what it's going to do, it's going to disconnect us from our previous connection we did from our other table right here. So see, that thing here is gone. So now I'm just going to load it to some other position as a table. So I'm going to right click again, load to. And then This time I'm going to load it to a table, and it's going to ask us where is the position. So I'm just going to point to some place in my spreadsheet. Let's say over here, press OK. And that should load that new table that we've generated here, see, as a result. And then going forward, because we did all those steps, if we, for example, add another person to this list and simply just hit refresh, that new record will be now here, and that extra column with extra +1 should just show up, just like that. So this was basically the base things you should know about Power Query language. If there is more interest into more in-depth Power Query language tutorials, I can do more of those. Let me know in comments if you want to see more in-depth M language for Power Query, and I'll go over that. Otherwise, this should give you a pretty solid base, and you should be able to now go to your advanced editor and read those steps and actually understand what exactly happens. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.